Cook my favorite dish, and I'll marry you. Waitress's unbelievable move stuns billionaire CEO. What if a single plate of food could change 2 lives forever? In a small diner on the outskirts of Chicago, 34-year-old Claire wiped down the same cracked counter she'd been cleaning for 8 years, her calloused hands moving in practiced circles. The morning rush had ended, leaving behind the familiar smell of coffee and bacon grease that had become her world. She'd never imagined that today, a man in a wrinkled suit would walk through those glass doors and turn everything upside down. The stranger looked exhausted, his expensive watch catching the fluorescent light as he slumped into the corner booth. Most folks around here wore work boots and flannel, but something about his tired eyes felt familiar. Claire had seen that look before, in her own mirror during the hardest months after her mother's passing. When he asked for something that tastes like home, she paused, her pen hovering over the notepad. Where are you watching from tonight? I'd love to know what comfort food means to you. David Chen hadn't eaten a real meal in 3 days. The 42-year-old CEO of Chen Industries had been living on conference room sandwiches and airplane peanuts, flying from one board meeting to another. His company was hemorrhaging money, and the weight of 3,000 employees' livelihoods pressed down on his shoulders like stones. When his driver took a wrong turn and ended up at Rosie's diner instead of the airport, David almost turned around. But something about the warm yellow light spilling from the windows made him pause. Claire studied his face as she poured his coffee. Rough day? She asked, noting the way his hands trembled slightly around the cup. He nodded, and something in his expression reminded her of her father after long shifts at the factory. You know what, she said, tucking her notepad into her apron. Forget the menu. I'm going to make you something special. In the kitchen, Claire's movements were sure and steady. She'd learned to cook from her grandmother, who'd fed half the neighborhood during the Depression. Tonight, she made what she called memory meatloaf, her mother's recipe with a twist of her own. Mashed potatoes whipped with real butter, green beans seasoned with bacon, and cornbread that crumbled just right. When she set the plate down, David looked up with surprise. I didn't order this. Claire smiled, wiping her hands on her apron. Sometimes we don't know what we need until someone gives it to us. The first bite stopped him cold. Flavors exploded across his tongue. Comfort, safety, the ghost of his grandmother's kitchen in Taiwan before his family immigrated. His eyes filled with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed in months. How did you? He started, but couldn't finish. Claire had already moved to another table, giving him space to feel whatever was happening. But she'd noticed the wedding ring tan line on his finger, the expensive suit that hung loose on his frame, the way he ate like a man who'd forgotten food could be more than fuel. When he left $40 for a $12 meal and whispered, "Thank you for saving my life," Claire wondered if she'd ever see him again. 3 weeks later, David returned. This time, he looked different, cleaner, but somehow more broken. He'd lost the company. The board had voted him out, and everything he'd built was gone. Could you make that meal again? He asked quietly, sliding into the same corner booth. Claire nodded, but this time she sat down across from him while the meatloaf cooked. Want to talk about it? She asked, pouring 2 cups of coffee. David found himself telling her everything. How he'd started the company with his best friend, how success had cost him his marriage, how he'd become so focused on profits that he'd forgotten why he started the business in the first place. Claire listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions that helped him untangle his thoughts. My ex-wife used to say I never came home, even when I was sitting right there, David admitted, staring into his coffee. She was right. I haven't felt truly present anywhere in years. But that first night here, eating your food, it was like waking up from a long, bad dream. Claire's own story came out in pieces. How she'd put herself through culinary school while caring for her dying mother. How she'd planned to open her own restaurant, but medical bills had eaten her savings. How she'd taken the diner job temporarily, and somehow 8 years had slipped by. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd been braver, she said softly. David leaned forward. It's not too late. You could still do it. Claire laughed, but not unkindly. With what money? Dreams don't pay rent. The meatloaf timer chimed, breaking the spell. As she stood to check the food, David made a decision that surprised even him. "What if I helped you?" he said when she returned with his plate. "I know business, and you know food. We could be partners." Claire stared at him like he'd spoken a foreign language. "You don't even know me," she whispered. David took a bite of the meatloaf, tasting the care and skill in every ingredient. "I know enough," he said. "I know you saved my life with this meal. I know you listen without trying to fix everything. And I know you cook with more heart than any chef I've ever met. If this moment touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up." But Claire was already shaking her head, fear creeping into her eyes. "People like you don't partner with people like me," she said, and David realized he had a lot more to prove than just his business sense. David started coming to the diner every day, but Claire grew more distant. She'd heard stories about rich men who made grand promises and disappeared when reality hit. Her father had warned her about people who lived in different worlds, and the $40 tip felt less like generosity and more like pity now. "I don't need saving," she told him one evening when he brought up the restaurant idea again. But David wasn't giving up. He'd started washing dishes after closing time, learning the rhythm of the kitchen. He listened to Claire's stories about regular customers: old Pete who came for coffee and conversation since his wife died, the single mom who brought her twins for pancakes on Sundays, the construction crew who needed hot meals before dawn shifts. "This place matters to people," he said one night, scrubbing a stubborn pan. "You matter to them." Claire watched him struggle with the simplest tasks. He'd never washed a dish in his life, and felt something shift. "Why are you really here?" she asked. David paused, his hands still in the soapy water. "Because for the first time in 20 years, I'm somewhere I want to be instead of somewhere I have to be. Because when I eat your food, I remember what it feels like to be human." The crisis came when Rosie announced the diner was closing. Rising rent and declining business had finally caught up. Claire's world crumbled. This place had been her anchor, her purpose, her home. The regular customers were devastated, and Claire felt responsible for letting them all down. She sat in the empty diner after her last shift, surrounded by memories and broken dreams. David found her there at midnight, crying over a cup of cold coffee. He didn't say anything at first, just sat beside her in the silence. Finally, Claire spoke. "I keep thinking about all the meals I'll never cook, all the people I'll never feed. It's not just a job, you know? It's who I am." David understood that feeling, the identity crisis that comes when everything you've built disappears. "What if we bought the building?" he said quietly. Claire looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "We?" David nodded. "Equal partners. Your recipes, your heart, your vision. My business knowledge and startup capital. We'll call it Claire's, and we'll do it right this time." Have you ever faced something like this, watching a dream slip away when you thought it was safe? Let us know in the comments. Claire wanted to believe him, but fear whispered that this was too good to be true. The next morning, David arrived with a lawyer and a business plan. He'd worked all night, sketching out a partnership that protected Claire's interests and gave her creative control. "I want to buy the building and lease it to us at cost," he explained, spreading papers across the diner counter. "You'll own 60% of the restaurant business. I'll handle finances and logistics, but every menu decision, every recipe, every hire, that's yours." Claire read through the documents, her hands shaking. It was fair, generous even, structured to ensure she couldn't be pushed out or taken advantage of. But it was the personal note at the bottom that broke her resolve. "Thank you for teaching me that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. Let's build something beautiful together." "Why 60%? She asked. David smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Because the heart of this place is you. I'm just here to make sure the lights stay on and the bills get paid." The lawyer explained every clause, ensuring Claire understood her rights and protections. By afternoon, they were signing papers, and Claire was crying again, but this time from joy. The renovation took 2 months. David proved to be surprisingly handy, learning to paint walls and install fixtures under Claire's patient guidance. They worked side by side, planning a menu that honored the diner's comfort food roots while showcasing Claire's culinary school training. The regular customers became investors of sorts, contributing family recipes and stories that would become part of the restaurant's identity. Old Pete suggested they keep the corner booth where David first sat, calling it the lucky table. The single mom with twins contributed her grandmother's apple pie recipe. The construction crew helped with the renovation in exchange for free breakfast for a month. Claire watched David learn everyone's names, their stories, and their struggles, and realized he was becoming part of the community she'd thought he could never understand. Opening night was magical. The dining room filled with familiar faces and new ones, drawn by word of mouth and the warm light spilling onto the street. Claire worked the kitchen while David managed the front, and together they created something neither could have built alone. If you've been enjoying this story, subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. As the last customer left and they locked the door, Claire realized she wasn't just starting a business, she was finally home. 6 months later, Claire's restaurant had become the heart of the neighborhood. The morning regulars still came for coffee and conversation, but now they were joined by food critics and young couples on dates, all drawn by the authentic comfort food and genuine warmth that filled every corner. Claire had found her voice as a chef, creating dishes that told stories and brought people together. David had found something even more valuable, a purpose that went beyond profit margins. He'd started a small foundation that helped other family-owned restaurants survive economic hardships, understanding now that some businesses served communities in ways that couldn't be measured in dollars. The angry, exhausted man who'd stumbled into Rosie's diner was gone, replaced by someone who knew the difference between being successful and being fulfilled. On a quiet Tuesday evening, as Claire finished prepping for the next day and David balanced the books, she realized they'd become more than business partners. They'd become family. Not in the romantic way the town gossips whispered about, but in something deeper, two people who'd saved each other from lives half-lived. David had taught her to dream bigger and trust in her own worth. Claire had shown him how to find joy in simple moments and genuine connections. "You know what I realized today?" Claire said, hanging up her apron. "That night, you asked for something that tastes like home? You weren't looking for food. You were looking for a place where you belonged." David looked up from the register, understanding flooding his face. "And you weren't just cooking dinner. You were offering hope to a stranger who'd forgotten how to ask for help." They'd both learned that the most important ingredients in any recipe weren't things you could buy. They were the love, attention, and care you stirred in with your own hands. Claire's meatloaf had become legendary not because of any secret spice, but because it was made with the intention to comfort and heal. Every dish that left their kitchen carried that same purpose. As they turned off the lights and locked up for the night, Claire looked back at the restaurant they'd built together. The lucky corner booth where their friendship began still held a small plaque. Sometimes the best partnerships start with a simple act of kindness. It was a reminder that success wasn't just about achieving your dreams, it was about lifting others up along the way. The neon sign flickered to life in the window, casting warm light onto the empty street. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, new opportunities to make someone's day a little brighter with good food and genuine care. And in a world that often felt cold and disconnected, Claire's restaurant stood as proof that sometimes, when you least expect it, a perfect stranger can become exactly what you need to find your way home. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more heartwarming tales that remind us all of the power of human kindness. Thank you for joining Claire and David on their journey. May your own table always be surrounded by people who see your worth.